The old ranch house stood silently against the amber horizon, weathered yet dignified like the woman who'd tended it for decades. Samuel traced his fingers along the worn kitchen table, where his grandmother had served countless meals, her absence now a palpable void in every corner of the homestead. The property deed in his name felt heavier than the paper it was printed on. Responsibility, legacy, and grief, all bound in legal terminology. Every morning since the funeral, the distant sounds from the padlocked barn grew more persistent, like the land itself was trying to speak to him. His grandmother's final words echoed in his mind. "Some doors stay closed for a reason, Sammy." What secret could be worth keeping behind those weathered barn doors for over 40 years? What would you do if everything you thought you knew about your family was built on carefully constructed lies? Samuel Harper stared at the faded photograph in his hands, himself at 10 years old, gap-toothed and sunburned, sitting proudly atop the fence his grandmother had taught him to mend that summer. Margaret Harper stood beside him, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, weathered hands resting on his small shoulders. The family album lay open on his lap, pages worn from decades of gentle turning. 3 months, he whispered to the empty living room. 3 months since I packed up my apartment in Chicago, resigned from the architectural firm, and came back to a place I'd only visited in summers. The decision had shocked his colleagues, abandoning a partnership track to manage a struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere. They couldn't understand the promise he'd made to Margaret on her deathbed, to care for Willow Creek Ranch as she had for 47 years. He closed the album and moved to the kitchen window. Outside, the Montana landscape stretched toward distant mountains, beautiful and indifferent to his grief. At 52, Samuel had returned to the beginning, trading drafting tables and client meetings for fence posts and feed schedule. The neighbor's truck appeared on the dusty road, slowing as it approached. Elaine Parker, 70-something and fiercely independent, had been checking on him almost daily since the funeral. Samuel sometimes wondered if she did it out of kindness or obligation to his grandmother. "You're looking thin," she announced minutes later, setting a casserole dish on the counter. "Margaret would have my hide if I let you waste away." "I appreciate it, Elaine, but you don't need to." "Hush." She waved away his protest. "Folk take care of each other out here. Your grandmother understood that better than most." She glanced around the kitchen, noting the stack of unopened mail and unwashed coffee cups. "This place treating you all right?" Samuel nodded, though all right hardly captured the complicated emotions of living in his grandmother's space. "Still adjusting. The ranch is more work than I remembered." "Of course it is. You were a summer visitor." Margaret handled the real burdens alone. There was no accusation in her tone, just matter-of-fact truth. "Did she ever consider selling after Grandpa died?" Elaine's expression tightened. "Not once. This land meant everything to her, especially after—" She paused, then changed direction. "Have you spoken with your mother?" Samuel's relationship with his mother was another complicated story. Linda Harper had left the ranch at 18 and rarely returned, even when her father died. The rift between mother and daughter had never healed, and Linda hadn't attended Margaret's funeral. "She called last week, said she might visit once things settled." Elaine made a non-committal sound and moved to the window. "Town's been curious about you. The prodigal grandson returning to save the family legacy. They've been spinning tales at the diner since you arrived." "What kind of tales?" "Oh, you know small towns. Some say you're here to sell off everything. Others think you're running from something in the city." She turned, studying him. "Margaret always said you were different from your mother, said you had roots here, whether you knew it or not." Later, after Elaine left, Samuel ventured onto the porch with a cup of coffee. The isolation that had initially felt oppressive had slowly become a comfort. In Chicago, he'd been surrounded by people yet often felt alone. Here, the solitude had substance and meaning. His gaze drifted to the barn in the distance. Once again, he thought he heard something, a metallic sound like tools being moved. He'd assumed it was the wind playing tricks, But today the air was still. The wren had always been his grandmother's domain. Even during childhood visits, she'd redirected his curiosity whenever he wandered too close. Nothing in there but old equipment and dust, she'd say, though the heavy padlock suggested otherwise. Samuel set down his coffee. Perhaps it was time to investigate what his grandmother had been protecting all these years. The tin recipe box sat on the kitchen counter, its blue paint chipped at the corners from decades of use. Samuel had discovered it tucked away in the pantry while searching for coffee filters. Inside, dozens of index cards bore his grandmother's neat handwriting recipes for everything from bread to preserves, arranged in meticulous alphabetical order. He selected one at random, Margaret's apple pie. The instructions were precise, but it was the notes in the margins that caught his attention. Use Macintosh tea prefers these, and add extra cinnamon when the leaves turn. Small glimpses into a life he'd only partially known. Some cards contained cryptic notations that made little sense. On a recipe for blackberry jam, made double batch, Org 87, one for safekeeping, another for pound cake, had celebration all clear 1994 written in faded ink. Samuel's attempt to establish a routine had begun with these recipes. Each morning he rose with the sun, made coffee and reviewed the list of tasks that never seemed to diminish. The irrigation system needed repairs, fences required mending, and bills continued to arrive with alarming regularity. The kitchen phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. "Samuel, it's Elaine. Thought you might need some help with those fence posts I saw you hauling yesterday. I've got it handled, but thanks. Margaret always said you were stubborn, just like your mother." There was a pause. Speaking of Linda, has she been in touch about the estate? Samuel sighed. "Not really. Our conversations tend to be brief. That's a shame, though I can't say I'm surprised. Elaine, do you know why they fell out? Mom never talks about it, and Grandma changed the subject whenever I asked." The line went quiet for a moment. "It's not my place to say, but your grandmother had her reasons. Linda was restless, never understood Margaret's attachment to this place. Then there was that business with the barn." "The barn? What about it?" "Oh, just teenage curiosity gone too far. Your mother was always poking around where she shouldn't." Elaine's tone shifted to something deliberately casual. "How is the barn, anyway? Roof still holding up?" Samuel hesitated. "I haven't been inside yet." "No? Well, no rush, I suppose. Probably just filled with old equipment." After hanging up, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that Elaine was probing for information. The barn seemed to be a focal point for everyone's unstated concerns. Later that afternoon, as Samuel repaired a section of fence, he spotted a truck approaching from the main road. It slowed at the property entrance, and a middle-aged man climbed out. "Mr. Harper? I'm Dr. Michael Tennyson, the local vet." He offered a weathered hand. "I used to check on your grandmother's horses. Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself." Samuel wiped his brow. "Horses? My grandmother didn't keep horses." Dr. Tennyson looked momentarily confused. "Well, not in recent years, but she used to have a pair of Appaloosas, beautiful animals." He glanced toward the barn. "That's partly why I stopped by. She mentioned in her will that I should check on something in the barn, but I'd need your permission." Her will mentioned the barn specifically, just a note through her lawyer, something about medication stored there that needed proper disposal. He shifted uncomfortably. "I could take care of it now, if you don't mind." Samuel studied the man. There was something rehearsed about the request. "I haven't been inside myself yet. The place is locked up tight." "Ah," Tennyson nodded slowly. "Well, no hurry, just doing as Margaret asked. She was particular about certain things." That evening, Samuel sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the ranch's financial records. The picture wasn't encouraging. The property taxes alone were substantial, and his grandmother's modest savings wouldn't cover expenses for long. Selling wasn't an option, not just because of his promise, but because the ranch represented something deeper to him. It was the one constant in a life marked by his parents' divorce, his mother's frequent moves, and his own failed marriage. Each summer here had been a sanctuary. He flipped to a page showing bank statements from the past year. Curiously, there were regular cash withdrawals, substantial amounts that didn't align with any documented expenses. Where had that money gone? Outside, the wind picked up, and once again Samuel heard a distinct sound from the direction of the barn, a metallic clang, followed by what almost seemed like a voice. He moved to the window and stared at the shadowy structure. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would find out what was in that barn. The locked wooden box taunted Samuel from its place on his grandmother's dresser. He'd found it while searching her bedroom for any clue about the barn's significance. Made of polished cherry wood with brass fittings, the box was small enough to hold in 2 hands, but required a key he couldn't locate. Samuel ran his fingers along the ornate keyhole, wondering what secrets it might contain. Beside the bed lay a stack of leather-bound journals, Margaret's diaries, spanning decades. Samuel had started reading them chronologically, hoping for insight into her life and the mysterious barn. But the journals contained strange gaps, entire months missing, pages clearly torn out, conversations referenced but never explained. Called Tea Today, one entry from 1987 read, "Arrangements made for the transfer. Will use the usual place." Nothing more was written for weeks afterward. A knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Tennyson stood on the porch, medical bag in hand. "Hope I'm not intruding," the veterinarian said. "Left my prescription pad in my truck yesterday. Thought I'd check if you needed anything while I was passing by." Samuel invited him in, offering coffee. As they sat at the kitchen table, Samuel studied the older man. Michael Tennyson was about 60, with the practical demeanor of someone used to dealing with both animals and their often emotional owners. "Did you know my grandmother well?" Samuel asked. Tennyson considered the question. "As well as anyone, I suppose. Margaret kept to herself, especially these last 10 years. But we had an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" "Professional courtesy. I helped with things around the ranch when needed. No questions asked. She was good to this community in her quiet way." "And the barn? What can you tell me about that?" Tennyson's expression remained neutral, but Samuel noticed his hand tightening around the coffee mug. "Just storage, as far as I know. Farm equipment, old furniture." "Why do you ask?" "Because everyone gets uncomfortable when I mention it. Because it's locked with a padlock that looks like it belongs on a bank vault. Because my grandmother made me promise never to go in near, yet you claim she wanted you to retrieve something from inside." The veterinarian set down his mug carefully. "Your grandmother had her reasons for privacy, Samuel. This property was her sanctuary after your grandfather passed. Perhaps we should respect that. I'm not looking to disrespect anything. I just need to understand what I've inherited here." Tennyson nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But some discoveries come with responsibilities you might not want." After the veterinarian left, Samuel returned to the financial documents. The ranch had been operating at a loss for years, sustained only by his grandmother's careful management and what appeared to be a separate income source he couldn't identify. A real estate assessment caught his eye. The property value far exceeded what he'd expected, primarily due to water rights and mineral deposits. There had been offers to purchase, substantial offers, all politely declined by Margaret over the years. The latest letter had arrived just a month before her death. Western Resource Development was interested in acquiring the Harper property at a premium. Their representative would be in touch to discuss terms. Samuel set the letter aside, troubled. If the land was so valuable, why had his grandmother struggled financially? And why turn down offers that could have made her final years comfortable? The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. "Samuel Harper?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "Speaking. This is Claire Davidson with First Montana Bank. I'm calling regarding your grandmother's safety deposit box. Our records indicate you're the designated heir, and we'll need you to come in to handle the paperwork." "Safety deposit box? I wasn't aware she had one." "Yes, sir. Box 24/7. Margaret Harper has maintained it since 1978. The annual fee is paid through December. Another piece of the puzzle. I'll come by tomorrow. That night, the sounds from the barn were more distinct than ever, a rhythmic tapping that couldn't be explained by wind or settling timbers. Samuel stood at his bedroom window, watching the structure in the moonlight. Tomorrow he would visit the bank, and then finally the barn. As he turned away, movement caught his eye, a flash of light near the barn door. Gone so quickly he might have imagined it. Samuel grabbed his jacket and flashlight, but by the time he reached the porch, the ranch had fallen silent again. The barn a dark silhouette against the night sky. He returned to bed uneasy, the wooden box from his grandmother's room now sitting on his nightstand like a challenge. Whatever secrets Margaret Harper had kept, they wouldn't stay buried much longer. Samuel knelt beneath the ancient oak tree where he'd spent countless childhood hours. His grandmother had called it the thinking tree, a place where problems seemed smaller against the backdrop of its sprawling branches. Now, as rain threatened on the horizon, he ran his hands along the gnarled trunk, remembering the best hiding places, Margaret had once told him, are the ones everyone can see but nobody thinks to look inside. His fingers found the hollow, a space where lightning had struck decades ago, leaving a cavity just large enough for a child's treasure. Samuel had hidden marbles, comic books, and small carved animals there during his summer visits. On impulse, he reached into the hollow, his hand closed around something cold and metallic. Not a forgotten childhood relic, but a key, an unusual one, with intricate notches and a stylized M etched into its head. Samuel examined it, puzzled. It was too heavy for a simple house key, too ornate for farm equipment. The bank visit that morning had raised more questions than answers. Margaret's safety deposit box contained only 3 items: a sealed envelope addressed to Samuel with instructions not to open until the time is right, a small leather pouch containing 3 uncut gemstones, and a photograph of a painting Samuel didn't recognize. The bank manager had been oddly deferential. "Your grandmother was a very private client," she explained. "She made special arrangements for this box." "What kind of arrangements?" "Annual payments in cash, specific instructions about access. She was one of our longest-standing customers." Thunder rolled across the valley as Samuel pocketed the key. Dark clouds massed over the western ridge, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. He hurried back to the house, arriving just as the storm broke in earnest. From the kitchen window, he watched sheets of rain sweep across the property. A sharp crack split the air, lightning striking somewhere nearby. Samuel counted until thunder followed, too close for comfort. When the second lightning bolt hit, Samuel saw it clearly, a direct strike to the old barn. The impact was followed by an ominous cracking sound. Even through the downpour, he could see that part of the roof had collapsed. His first instinct was relief. Nature had solved his dilemma. With the barn damaged, he had legitimate reason to enter without betraying his grandmother's wishes. His second thought was more practical. Whatever was inside now stood exposed to the elements. The phone rang, startling him. "Harper residence," he answered, half expecting Elaine checking on him during the storm. Silence greeted him, then a man's voice, deep and measured. "Is this Samuel Harper?" "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name isn't important. I was an associate of Margaret's. I understand she's passed." Samuel's grip tightened on the receiver. "What do you want?" "To express my condolences and to inquire about Margaret's papers. She was holding something for me, something valuable." "I don't know what you're talking about." A pause. "I think you do, Mr. Harper. Or you will soon." "The barn, Samuel. Check the barn." The line went dead before Samuel could respond. He stared at the phone, then at the storm-lashed barn in the distance. The mysterious caller knew about the barn and expected something to be there. Samuel pulled on his raincoat and boots. The decision was made for him now. Whatever his grandmother had been protecting, it was at risk. As he stepped onto the porch, the rain hammered against the roof like an urgent warning. The distance to the barn had never seemed so long. Mud pulled at his boots with each step, and the wind drove rain into his face. By the time he reached the barn door, he was soaked despite his raincoat. The padlock gleamed in the storm's half-light, untouched by the damage to the roof. Samuel examined it more closely now. Not a standard farm lock at all, but a sophisticated mechanism that seemed oddly out of place. He withdrew the key from his pocket, weighing it in his palm. Some doors stay closed for a reason, Sammy. His grandmother's warning echoed in his mind, competing with the stranger's directive. The roof damage made a convenient excuse, but Samuel knew he was crossing a threshold his grandmother had wanted to remain uncrossed. The key slid into the padlock with surprising ease. A perfect fit. Samuel took a deep breath and turned it, feeling the mechanism's tumblers align with a solid click. The lock opened in his hand, heavy and final. As Samuel pulled the barn door open, another lightning bolt illuminated the interior. For a brief moment he glimpsed what appeared to be an ordinary storage space. Farm equipment, old furniture, hay bales. Then the lightning faded, and something in the shadows moved. The padlock felt unnaturally heavy in Samuel's hand as he removed it from the chain. Years of Montana winters had left the barn door stiff, and he had to push with his shoulder to force it open. Hinges protested with a sound like a distant scream, barely audible above the storm. Samuel swept his flashlight beam across the interior. At first glance, the barn appeared disappointingly indie. A tractor from the 1970s, stacks of weathered lumber, rusted tools hanging on pegs. The air smelled of old hay and engine oil. "Hello?" he called, feeling foolish immediately after. The only response was water dripping through the damaged section of roof onto a canvas top below. He stepped further inside, careful of his footing on the dirt floor now turning muddy from the rain. The movement he'd glimpsed earlier was nowhere to be seen, likely just shadows playing tricks in the lightning flash. The beam of his flashlight caught something unusual on the far wall, a framed photograph. Samuel approached, puzzled. It showed his grandmother, much younger, standing beside a man he didn't recognize. They were formally dressed, the man in a tuxedo, Margaret in an elegant gown. The date stamp in the corner read June 17. The man wasn't Samuel's grandfather, who had died when Samuel was just 2 years old. This man was taller, with aristocratic features, and an intensity that seemed to reach through the decades. Margaret was looking at him with undisguised affection. Samuel carefully removed the frame from the wall and turned it over. Written down the back in his grandmother's handwriting, Tate and M. Geneva, Tati. The same initial mentioned in her journal and recipe cards. A sharp crack from above made Samuel jump. More of the roof was giving way under the storm's assault. He needed to work quickly to assess the damage and secure whatever he could. The floor beneath his feet seemed solid enough, despite the increasing puddles. As Samuel moved his flashlight beam methodically across the space, he noticed something odd about the tractor's position. It was angled awkwardly, as if hastily parked. Approaching the vehicle, he discovered why. Behind it, partially concealed, was a large square outline in the floor. A trapdoor, its edges barely discernible against the surrounding dirt. A metal ring lay flush with the surface. Samuel's heart quickened. No Rudy barn had a hidden trapdoor. He knelt and pulled on the ring. The door didn't budge. There appeared to be another keyhole smaller than the padlock, but with the same unusual design. With trembling fingers, Samuel tried the key again. It slid in perfectly, turning with a smooth precision that belied the door's weathered appearance. The trapdoor released with a soft hiss, as if hermetically sealed. Samuel raised it slowly, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. Cool, dry air wafted upward, smelling faintly of paper and something else. A chemical odor he couldn't identify. Pointing his flashlight downward illuminated only the first few steps. Whatever lay at the bottom remained hidden in shadow. Samuel hesitated, suddenly aware of the magnitude of his discovery. This wasn't just a storage cellar or storm shelter. The sophisticated locks, the hidden entrance, his grandmother had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal whatever was below. The anonymous phone caller's words echoed in his mind. Check the barn. Had they known about this hidden chamber? Was this where Margaret kept the papers they sought? A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the barn through gaps in the walls, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap. The storm was directly overhead now. Samuel knew he should close up and return to the house until the weather passed, but the discovery pulled at him with irresistible force. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he murmured, placing his foot on the first step. The wood was surprisingly solid, without the creak he'd expected from its age. Another step, and another. The air grew cooler as he descended, the sounds of the storm receding behind him. 13 steps down, the staircase ended at a small landing with what appeared to be a metal door. Unlike the rustic barn above, this door was modern, with a sleek handle and another keyhole. Samuel tried the key one more time. The door swung open silently, revealing a space that shattered every expectation. The room beyond was fully finished and climate-controlled. Fluorescent lights flickered on automatically as the door opened, revealing a chamber roughly the size of his grandmother's living room. The walls were lined with metal shelving, filing cabinets, and what looked like specialized storage cases. But what stopped Samuel cold was the desk at the center, where a ham radio setup sat amid stacks of documents. Behind it hung a large map marked with dozens of pins connected by red string, and taped to the chair a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, Sammy, I knew you'd find your way down eventually. I'm sorry for the secrets. It's time you learned the truth." Samuel stood frozen at the entrance to the underground room, his grandmother's note trembling in his hand. The space before him was meticulously organized, a stark contrast to Margaret Harper's somewhat cluttered farmhouse above. Climate-controlled, dust-free, with modern amenities, including what appeared to be a small bathroom tucked into one corner. The radio equipment dominated the center desk, not just any ham setup, but vintage technology from what looked like the 1940s, lovingly maintained. Samuel approached it cautiously, running his fingers over the dials. Next to it sat a more modern transceiver, its power light glowing green. "What were you doing down here, Grandma?" he whispered. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, labeled by year, starting from 1968 and continuing to the present. A corkboard displayed newspaper clippings, most yellowed with age. Samuel moved closer to read the headlines. "Museum heist stuns Jenner. Priceless artworks. Vanish without trace. Interpol baffled by phantom thefts across Europe. Art world reels from third major robbery." Each article dated from the early 1970s, each describing sophisticated art thefts where security systems were bypassed with expert precision. In several, authorities speculated the same team was responsible, professionals who left no evidence and targeted only the most valuable pieces. Samuel's gaze fell on a black and white photo accompanying one article. Though grainy, it showed surveillance footage of a tall man in a guard's uniform. His face was mostly obscured, but something about the posture seemed familiar. Nearby shelves held what appeared to be technical manuals for alarm systems, books on art history, and detailed diagrams of various European museums, all dating from decades ago. A leather-bound ledger caught Samuel's attention. Opening it revealed meticulous records in his grandmother's handwriting, dates, locations, item descriptions, and values. The final column contained checkmarks beside most entries. The most recent entry was dated just 3 months before Margaret's death. Vermeer study, Astor family, Boston, returned Ver Christoph. Samuel sat heavily in the desk chair, trying to process what he was seeing. His grandmother, the woman who'd taught him to bake apple pies and identify constellations, appeared to have been involved in high-profile art thefts. Or had she? The word "returned" appeared repeatedly in the ledger. Samuel flipped back through the pages, finding the same notation beside increasingly more entries as the years progressed. His eyes returned to the map on the wall. The pins were concentrated in Europe and North America, with red strings connecting many back to a central point in southern France. Handwritten labels identified dates and names, some of which appeared in the ledger. A metal filing cabinet in the corner bore no lay-by. Unlike the others, it was locked. Samuel tried his key, but it didn't fit. Instead, he noticed a small panel beside it with a numeric keypad. On impulse, he tried his birthday, Neo 5-12-7. The cabinet remained locked. Then he remembered the date on the photograph upstairs. June. Samuel entered Neo 6-7-7-7. A soft click, and the cabinet unlocked. Inside were folders organized by family name. He selected one at random, Rothschild, and opened it to find detailed documentation of artwork, photographs, provenance records, and insurance forms. Paper-clipped to each file was a newspaper clipping describing the Nazi confiscation of the pieces during World War II. Another file contained correspondence between Margaret and various individuals, many written in French or German. Though Samuel couldn't understand all the content, the tone seemed professional, almost legal. Many included expressions of profound gratitude. The final drawer contained something unexpected, a small case holding a sophisticated lock-picking set, electronic tools, whose purpose Samuel could only guess at, and several passports. He opened one. His grandmother's younger face stared back, but the name read Marie Beaumont, French citizen. Samuel's mind reeled. The woman who had raised him during summers at the ranch, who had seemed the epitome of small-town American life, had apparently lived a double existence for decades. The storm continued to rage above, but Samuel barely noticed, lost in the evidence of Margaret Harper's secret life. He returned to her note, reading it again. If you're reading this, Sammy, I knew you'd find your way down eventually. I'm sorry for the secrets. It's time you learned the truth. That first paragraph was more. There's a recording in the second drawer that explains everything. Listen to it when you're ready. What you found here is both a burden and a legacy. I never wanted this for you, but circumstances have forced my hand. Trust Elaine. Trust Michael. Don't trust anyone who asks about the collection without using my full name. Samuel opened the indicated drawer and found an old reel-to-reel tape recorder with a tape already loaded. His hand hovered over the play button, then withdrew. Whatever revelations waited on that tape, he needed time to process what he'd already discovered. As he turned to leave, his flashlight beam caught something half-hidden behind the filing cabinet, a small landscape painting in an ornate frame, exactly like the photograph from the safety deposit box. The manila envelope felt substantial in Samuel's hands as he sat at his grandmother's kitchen table. Inside were the documents he'd brought up from the underground room, passports with his grandmother's face, but different names: Marie Beaumont, Elizabeth Keller, Anna Rick, each from a different country, each expertly crafted. Not mere disguises for costume parties, but professional-grade identity documents. Samuel had spent the night reading through the papers, trying to reconcile the grandmother he knew with the woman these documents suggested. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine morning sky and a mind clouded with questions. The knock at the door came precisely at 9. Elaine Parker stood on the porch, her usual casserole dish replaced by a grave expression. "You went into the barn," she said without preamble. Samuel stepped back, allowing her to enter. "How did you know?" "Motion sensors. Margaret had them installed years ago. My phone gets an alert." Elaine moved past him into the kitchen, her eyes immediately finding the passports. "I see you've been busy. You knew about all this." It wasn't a question, but Elaine nodded anyway. "Some of it, not everything." She sat at the table, suddenly looking every one of her 70-plus years. Margaret was a private person, even with friends. Samuel joined her, sliding the passports across the table. "These aren't the documents of a private person, Elaine. These are the tools of someone living a double life." He leaned forward. "Who was she? Really?" Elaine sighed, tracing a finger over the name Marie Beaumont. "She was exactly who you knew her to be, a woman who loved this land and loved you. The rest," she hesitated, The rest is complicated. I've got time for complicated. It's not my story to tell, Samuel. Margaret left instructions. There's a sequence to how things should be revealed. Instructions? For after her death? For whom? For those of us who helped her. Michael, me, a few others. We each have our part. Elaine glanced toward the window. You're not the only one grieving her loss, and you're not the only one with questions that need answering. Samuel followed her gaze and noticed a black SUV parked at the end of the driveway, too far to identify its occupants. Are they watching the house? They've been watching since the funeral, waiting to see what you'd do. Who are they? That depends on which ones they are. Elaine's matter-of-fact tone sent a chill through Samuel. There are people who believe Margaret had something they want. Some think you now have it. The collection. The term from his grandmother's note. What is it? Elaine's expression remained carefully neutral. Have you listened to the recording yet? No. Then I shouldn't say more. She stood, moving to the coffee pot with practiced ease. As she poured 2 cups, she spoke with her back to him. Install the security cameras. Michael brought by yesterday. Don't go back to the barn without one of us present. And Samuel, she turned, fixing him with an intense gaze. Don't remove anything from the property. Nothing. Not even what seems insignificant. After Elaine left, Samuel spent the afternoon installing the security cameras, high-end equipment that seemed excessive for a simple ranch. He positioned them as Michael had diagrammed, covering the driveway, the approaches to the house, and particularly the barn. The final camera required mounting near the oak tree. As Samuel worked, he noticed a weathered carving in the trunk he'd somehow missed before. Mempulse T inside a rough heart. Like teenagers might carve, yet the position suggested it had been done by adults, higher than a child could reach. By evening, the surveillance system was operational, feeding to a monitor Samuel set up in the living room. The black SUV had departed hours ago, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As dusk fell, headlights appeared on the monitor, approaching slowly down the long driveway. Samuel recognized Michael Tennyson's truck. The veterinarian carried a bottle of whiskey and a grim expression. Elaine called, said you found the room. He poured 2 glasses without waiting for an invitation. That changes things. How exactly? Accelerates the timeline. Michael handed him a glass. There's a protocol for this, Samuel. Margaret was meticulous about contingencies. So I keep hearing, but no one will tell me what's actually going on. Michael studied him for a long moment. The recording will explain more than I can. But first, he drew a folded paper from his pocket. You should know that someone accessed your grandmother's safety deposit box 3 days before you did. Samuel straightened. That's impossible. The bank said I was the only authorized person. Officially, yes, but the manager called me when it happened, part of Margaret's security measures. Someone used identification and authorization codes that appeared legitimate. They photographed the contents but didn't remove anything. Who? We don't know, but whatever Margaret was protecting, whoever she was protecting it from, they're closing in. Michael tapped the security monitor. These won't stop them, but they'll give us warning. Later, alone again, Samuel watched the property's perimeter on the monitor. The whiskey had done little to calm his nerves. His quiet inheritance had transformed into something dangerous, something with stakes he couldn't yet comprehend. His cell phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. The collection must be protected at all costs. Margaret understood this. Do you? The small painting sat on the kitchen table, illuminated by the morning light streaming through the window. At first glance it appeared unremarkable, a pastoral landscape with rolling hills and a distant farmhouse, roughly the size of a sheet of paper. The ornate gilt frame seemed almost too elaborate for such a modest work. Samuel had retrieved it from the underground room at dawn, ignoring Elaine's warning about removing items from the property. He needed to understand what made this particular painting special. Turning it over, he examined the back. A faded museum label was still attached. Landscape with farmhouse. attributed to school of Jacob van Ruisdael, C.S. Wins. A web search on his phone revealed nothing unusual about van Ruisdael, a respected but not extraordinary Dutch landscape painter of the Golden Age. This wasn't a lost masterpiece by Rembrandt or Vermeer. Why would his grandmother have hidden it? The security monitor beeped, alerting him to a vehicle approaching. Dr. Tennyson's truck appeared on the screen. Minutes later, the veterinarian entered without knocking, as if they'd moved beyond such formalities. "You didn't listen to the recording," he said, noticing the painting immediately. "And you brought something up from below. Not your wisest move, Samuel. I needed to see it in proper light." Samuel gestured to the painting. "It's hardly the Mona Lisa. Why would anyone care about this?" Michael approached cautiously, examining the painting without touching it. Value isn't always in the artist's name. Sometimes it's in the provenance, who owned it, where it's been. He pointed to the museum label. This was displayed publicly once, then disappeared in a heist in the 1970s. Michael nodded. "Among other pieces. But here's what you need to understand. The paintings themselves were never the point." Before he could elaborate, the security monitor chimed again. A sleek black car was coming up the driveway, the same model Samuel had seen parked at a distance the day before. Michael moved quickly, wrapping the painting in a dish towel and handing it back to Samuel. "Put this away, now. Then meet me on the porch. Be casual, but alert." By the time Samuel returned from hiding the painting in his bedroom closet, Michael was on the front porch, the very picture of a country veterinarian enjoying the morning air. The black car stopped at a respectful distance, and a woman in her 40s emerged. Her tailored suit and confident stride marked her as someone unaccustomed to ranch life. "Dr. Tennyson," she called, approaching. "What a coincidence finding you here." "Miss Blackwell," Michael replied evenly. "Making house calls is part of rural veterinary practice. What brings Westridge Development to the Harper Ranch?" She smiled thinly. "Just following up on our interest in the property." Her gaze shifted to Samuel as he stepped onto the porch. "Mr. Harper, I presume?" "Catherine Blackwell, Senior Acquisitions Director. We've been trying to reach you." Samuel maintained a neutral expression following Michael's lead. "I've been busy settling my grandmother's affairs. Of course, my condolences." Her rehearsed sympathy barely masked her impatience. "When you're ready, I'd like to discuss our offer for the property. Westridge is prepared to pay significantly above market value. I'm not selling. You haven't heard our offer. I don't need to. The ranch isn't for sale." Catherine's professional demeanor slipped slightly. "Miss Harper, you should know that environmental surveys indicate significant water contamination on this property. The remediation costs alone are a fabrication," Michael interrupted. "I've been treating animals from this watershed for 20 years. There's no contamination." Her smile returned, colder now. "Perhaps we could speak privately, Mr. Harper. Some aspects of our offer might be personally advantageous to you in ways Dr. Tennyson wouldn't appreciate. Anything you have to say can be said in front of my friend." Catherine assessed the situation, then nodded curtly. "As you wish. My card, when you reconsider." She placed it on the porch railing. "Westridge always gets what it wants, Mr. Harper. One way or another." She turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, how are you finding the barn? Any interesting discoveries?" The deliberate question hung in the air. Samuel kept his expression neutral with effort. "Just old farm equipment. Nothing worth your interest." After she departed, Michael and Samuel watched until her car disappeared down the driveway. "That wasn't about real estate," Samuel said. "No." Michael's voice was grim. "They know about the room, or at least suspect. Westridge Development is a front for something else." "What?" "Listen to the recording, Samuel, today." That afternoon, Samuel's mother called, her voice unusually animated. "I've been thinking about what you said, about going through Mom's things together. I could fly in this weekend." Samuel frowned. He hadn't suggested any such thing. "That would be good," he said carefully. "Great, I'll email my itinerary. Oh, and Sammy, don't throw away anything that looks important, especially papers or artwork. Your grandmother might have had things of sentimental value. After hanging up, Samuel stared at the phone, a chill running down his spine. His mother, who had avoided the ranch for decades, was suddenly eager to visit immediately after he'd discovered the underground room. The coincidence felt impossible. Something was accelerating, force converging on Willow Creek Ranch from all directions. Samuel made his decision. It was time to hear his grandmother's voice again. The leather case sat open on the kitchen table, revealing an assortment of specialized tools. Samuel couldn't identify small brushes, magnifying lenses, ultraviolet lights, and various bottles of solutions. Patricia Wells, professor of art history at Montana State University, carefully examined the landscape painting through a jeweler's loupe. "Where did you say you found this?" she asked, without looking up. "My grandmother's estate," Samuel replied, the partial truth coming easily now. "She had quite a collection of artwork. I'm trying to determine what's valuable and what isn't." Dr. Wells set down the loupe and picked up a UV light. "Well, Mr. Harper, what you have here is certainly interesting." She ran the light over the painting's surface, revealing fluorescent patterns invisible to the naked eye. The pigments and canvas are consistent with mid-17th century techniques. The brushwork shows considerable skill. "So it's authentic?" "A real Van Roost," I said, "School of Van Roosdale, not necessarily by his hand. But yes, it appears to be a genuine period piece." She turned the painting over, studying the museum label. "This provenance marker is interesting. May I photograph it?" Samuel hesitated, remembering Michael's caution. "I'd prefer to keep this private for now. Family reasons." Dr. Wells gave him a curious look, but didn't press. "The frame is not original to the piece, probably early 20th century. She ran her fingers gently along the gilt edge. "Expertly crafted, though. Someone cared enough to present this modest landscape in an elaborate setting. What would something like this be worth to a collector? Perhaps 70 to 90,000, depending on authentication and provenance. More if a definitive connection to Van Roosdale could be established." She paused. "Of course, if it was stolen property, its value would be complicated by legal issues." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "Stolen? Just speaking hypothetically." Dr. Wells smiled. "Many European artworks changed hands under questionable circumstances during the World Wars. Museums are still sorting through legitimate claims versus rightful ownership." After the professor departed, Samuel returned to the barn. He'd listened to part of his grandmother's recording the previous night, but the revelations had been so shocking he'd needed time to process before continuing. Margaret's voice, firm despite her age, had explained her involvement with a man named Thomas Reinhardt, an art expert who had discovered that numerous pieces looted by Nazis had found their way into major museums after the war, their provenance deliberately obscured. Rather than pursue legal channels that moved at glacial pace, they had taken direct action, retrieving the stolen works and returning them to the families of their original owners. What had begun as a justice mission had evolved into something more personal. Thomas and Margaret had fallen in love, working together for years before settling at Willow Creek Ranch as a safe repository for works awaiting return. Samuel descended the stairs to the underground room, determined to hear the rest of the story. The reel-to-reel tape was still loaded, waiting at the exact point where he'd stopped. As Margaret's voice filled the room again, Samuel examined the authentication kit Dr. Wells had returned to him. The professor had confirmed what his grandmother's recording was revealing. The art itself wasn't the true treasure. It was what the art represented, a decades-long mission to restore justice, piece by piece. The recording continued, explaining how Thomas had died 15 years ago, leaving Margaret to continue their work alone. She'd established a network of trusted allies, Michael, Elaine, and others around the world, who helped identify heirs and arrange anonymous returns. "The painting you've likely found by now, the landscape," Margaret's voice explained, "is special not for its artistic value, but for what it represents. It was the first piece Thomas and I recovered together. We've kept it as a reminder of our purpose. Samuel paused the tape, remembering Catherine Blackwell's visit and his mother's sudden interest. The implications were troubling. If Westridge Development knew about the underground room and the collection, what did they really want? And how did his mother fit into all this? The security monitor he'd brought downstairs beeped. Someone was approaching the barn. Samuel rewound the tape slightly and hit record, creating a small gap in his grandmother's message. Insurance against prying ears. Climbing the stairs, he prepared to greet whoever had arrived. Through the barn door, he could see a sheriff's department vehicle in the driveway. Sheriff Jim Collins stood outside, hands resting casually on his utility belt. "Afternoon, Mr. Harper," he called. "Mind if I ask you a few questions? Had reports of unusual activity out this way last night, lights in the barn at odd hours." Samuel stepped outside, pulling the barn door closed behind him. "Just going through my grandmother's things, Sheriff." "Lot to sort through." The sheriff nodded, his gaze drifting to the sophisticated padlock now reattached to the door. "That's quite a security system for farm equipment. My grandmother valued her privacy." "Apparently so." Sheriff Collins didn't move to leave. "You know, I've been sheriff here for 12 years. Your grandmother was a respected member of this community, but even respected folks have their secrets." Samuel maintained his composure. "We all do, I suppose." "Indeed." The sheriff handed him a business card. "Call if you notice anything unusual. Strangers asking questions. Unfamiliar vehicles." He turned to leave, then added, "By the way, your mother called the department yesterday. Wanted to know if we keep an eye on vacant properties. Told her you were in residence now, so not to worry." As the sheriff drove away, Samuel checked his phone. 3 missed calls from his mother. A text message from an unknown number. "Don't trust the authorities. Compromised." And a calendar alert he hadn't created. "Linda Harper arrives tomorrow, too." The yellowed newspaper clippings spread across the kitchen table told a story that seemed more fiction than fact. Samuel had retrieved them from the underground room that morning, needing to understand more before his mother's arrival. ART World shocked by daring museum heist, proclaimed a 1973 headline from the New York Times. Below it, a grainy security camera image showed a tall figure in a security guard's uniform. Though the face wasn't clearly visible, Samuel could see the resemblance to the man in the photograph with his grandmother. Another clipping from a Swiss newspaper featured an Interpol bulletin seeking information on a suspect identified only as the specialist, believed responsible for a string of high-profile art thefts across Europe. The crimes shared a signature: sophisticated security systems bypassed without triggering alarms, nothing damaged, and only specific pieces taken, all later discovered to have questionable provenance related to Nazi confiscations. One article mentioned a female accomplice described by a witness as elegant, with an American accent. The description sent a chill through Samuel. The woman was never identified, but the article noted that several museum staff remembered her visiting as a patron in the days before the theft, her art knowledge impressive and specific. A more recent clipping from an art magazine discussed the mysterious phenomenon of Nazi-looted paintings anonymously returned to the descendants of their original owners. While museums and governments debate restitution policies for years, someone is bypassing the red tape entirely, the article noted. Is this vigilante justice or something more complex? Samuel's phone rang, startling him. Michael Tennyson's number flashed on the screen. "Your mother's flight just landed," the veterinarian said without preamble. "Elaine is watching the airport. Black SUV waiting in arrivals, same model that's been surveilling the ranch. They're meeting her. Unclear. Could be monitoring. Could be escorting. Either way, you need to be prepared." "For what exactly?" Michael's voice lowered. "Linda left for a reason, Samuel. She knew about the operation, about Thomas. How much do you know about my mother?" A hesitation, enough to be cautious. Margaret kept her distance from Linda for the past 30 years for good reason. After hanging up, Samuel returned to the clippings. One photograph particularly caught his attention. a society page from 1975 showing Thomas Reinhardt at a gallery opening in Paris. A young woman at his side identified as Marie Beaumont. His grandmother, using one of her aliases behind them, partially obscured but unmistakable, was a much younger version of his mother, Linda. Samuel's heart raced. His mother had known Thomas, had been part of their world, their work. Yet she'd left, cutting ties so completely that she hadn't even attended her own mother's funeral. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from these thoughts. Through the window he saw Elaine's car approaching. She emerged alone, her expression grim. "Your mother gave the driver the slip at the rental car counter," she reported, stepping inside. "Took a cab instead of the car reserved in her name." "She's being careful, or deceptive," Samuel countered. Elaine's eyes fell on the newspaper clippings. "I see you've been doing research, trying to understand what I'm in the middle of." Samuel tapped the society page photo. "My mother knew Thomas Reinhardt, was involved somehow." "Yes." Elaine sat heavily at the table. Linda was 16 when Margaret met Thomas. By 18 she was helping them, brilliant, fearless, and natural. What happened? A job went wrong. Someone got hurt. Thomas took the blame publicly, but it was Linda's mistake. Elaine shook her head. She couldn't forgive herself, or them, for continuing afterward. She left, determined to build a normal life away from all this. And now she's coming back. Why? That's what worries me. Elaine gathered the clippings carefully. These should go back to the secure room. Too risky to have them in the open. As Samuel helped collect the articles, a small envelope fell from between the pages. Inside was a single photograph. Thomas Reinhardt in his later years, sitting on the porch of the ranch house. On the back, written in what Samuel recognized as his mother's handwriting, "I'm sorry it ended this way. I never stopped believing in what we started." The date was just 1 week before Thomas reportedly died. She came back. Samuel realized aloud. She saw him one last time. Margaret never mentioned it. Elaine said, clearly surprised. "More secrets." Samuel pocketed the photograph. "What exactly is the collection, Elaine?" "The whole truth this time." Elaine met his gaze steadily. 27 pieces of art, still waiting to be returned. The last of Thomas and Margaret's recoveries. Some of the heirs haven't been located. Others are in countries too dangerous to approach directly. And who wants them besides us? Several groups. Some who want to profit from them. Others who want to ensure they're never returned. Families who built fortunes on stolen legacies. She glanced toward the window. "But I'm more concerned about whoever has been influencing your mother. Linda knows the security protocols, the hiding places. If she's working with the wrong people..." The sound of another vehicle approaching cut her short. Samuel checked the security monitor, seeing a taxi coming up the long driveway. "She's here," he said quietly. Elaine stood, straightening her shoulders. "Remember, Samuel, your mother left all this behind for a reason. Whatever she says, whatever she claims to want, trust your instincts." The taxi stopped. Linda Harper stepped out, paid the driver, and stood looking up at the house she'd fled decades ago. Even at a distance, Samuel could see how she squared her shoulders before walking toward the porch, the exact same way he did when preparing for confrontation. Some inheritances, it seemed, couldn't be escaped. The old cassette recorder whirred softly as Samuel pressed play. His grandmother's voice filled the room, stronger than in her final days, recorded years earlier as insurance against a moment like this. "If you're listening to this, Thomas, it means Linda has returned. Remember our agreement. No matter what she says, no matter how sincere she seems, the collection stays secured until the original conditions are met." Samuel glanced at his mother, seated across from him at the kitchen table. At 58, Linda Harper remained striking, silver threading through her dark hair, the same determined set to her jaw that he recognized from the mirror. She'd been silent as he played the recording, her expression unreadable. "She didn't update it," Linda said finally. "After he died, she kept the same warning in place." "Can you blame her?" Samuel kept his voice neutral. You disappeared for decades, then suddenly return when there might be something valuable to claim. Is that what you think of me? Hurt flashed across her face. That I abandoned my family for 30 years, only to return for profit? I don't know what to think. You've been a holiday phone call and occasional birthday card my entire adult life. Now you're here right after I discover an underground room full of apparently stolen art. Linda flinched at the word stolen. Recovered, not stolen. There's a difference. Not to law enforcement, which is why discretion has always been paramount. She leaned forward. Samuel, whatever my mother told you about me, about why I left, she told me almost nothing. That's the problem. Everything I'm learning comes in fragments from people with their own agendas. Samuel gestured to Elaine, who stood by the window keeping watch. Why did you really leave, Mom? What happened that was so terrible you cut ties completely? Linda's gaze dropped to her hands. I made a mistake. During a recovery in Vienna, security protocols changed unexpectedly. A guard was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her voice wavered. He was injured. Badly. Because of my miscalculation. Thomas took the blame. Elaine added from the window. Publicly, yes, to protect me. Linda looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But I couldn't forgive myself. The work was important, but that man had a family too. Where was the justice for them? Samuel studied his mother, trying to reconcile this revelation with the woman who'd raised him in suburban normalcy, working as a high school art teacher, attending his soccer games, making Sunday pancakes. So you left it all behind. I tried to, built a new life, had you? She smiled faintly, but the past has a way of resurfacing. 3 months ago, I was approached by someone who knew about my history with Thomas and Margaret, someone who claimed to represent the family of that injured guard. And what did they want? Information about the collection, specifically about a particular painting, a small Vermeer study believed lost during the war. Samuel exchanged glances with Elaine. What did you tell them? Nothing at first. But they were persuasive, persistent. Said the guard never fully recovered, that his family deserved compensation. She straightened. I came here to warn Margaret, to help secure the collection before they could find it. But I was too late. She was already gone. The room fell silent, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. Outside, the afternoon light had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. Do you believe her? Samuel asked Elaine. The older woman shrugged. Margaret always said Linda was the best natural performer she'd ever seen. Better even than Thomas. Linda's jaw tightened. I didn't come here to be insulted. Then why did you come? Samuel pressed. If you wanted to warn Grandma but she died before you could, why come now? Why the sudden interest in artwork you walked away from decades ago? Because they're still looking for it, and now they know about you. Linda reached for her purse, removing a small notebook. These are the names and descriptions I could gather. People who have been asking questions, watching the property. Some work for private collectors, others for families trying to prevent the return of artwork that would reveal their fortunes were built on theft. Samuel took the notebook, flipping through pages of detailed notes, descriptions of vehicles, names, affiliations, methods of approach. You've been investigating them, he realized. I was a part of this world once. Some skills you never forget. Linda's expression softened. I may have left the life, Samuel, but I never betrayed it. Whatever else you believe about me, believe. The security monitor on the counter beeped softly. Michael's truck was coming up the driveway, moving faster than usual. Samuel tensed, watching as the veterinarian parked haphazardly and sprinted toward the house. We have a problem, Michael announced as he burst through the door. Sheriff's Department just issued a warrant to search the property. Anonymous tip about stolen artwork. His gaze landed on Linda. They're 10 minutes out. Whatever we're going to do, it needs to happen now. Samuel looked from his mother to Elaine to Michael, the weight of decision pressing upon him. What would Margaret do? Protect the collection All three answered in unison. It was time to fulfill his grandmother's legacy, whatever the cost. The yellowed birth certificate trembled in Samuel's hands. The document had emerged from a hidden compartment in the underground room, part of a cache of personal papers they'd rushed to secure before the sheriff's search. Linda Marie Reinhardt, he read aloud, his voice barely audible. Born June 4, 1967, Samuel looked up at his mother, who stood with arms crossed, tension evident in every line of her body. The sheriff and his deputies were methodically searching the main house above, their footsteps occasionally audible through the ceiling of the hidden chamber. Your last name was Reinhardt, not Harper. Linda nodded once, her eyes never leaving the document.
Yes.
Thomas Reinhardt was your father. Yes. Samuel struggled to process this revelation, but you always told me your father died before you were born, that Grandma remarried when you were 3, to William Harper. That was the official story, Linda said quietly, the one Margaret crafted to protect us all. Elaine stepped forward, her normally stoic demeanor softened by sympathy. Your grandmother and Thomas couldn't marry Samuel. He was too well known in certain circles. Too many people looking for him after the Vienna incident. So William Harper, a fiction, Michael supplied from his position by the monitoring equipment. Margaret never remarried. She created the identity to give Linda a father on paper, to make their life in Montana seem ordinary. Samuel's mind raced, reconstructing his family history with this new information. Then Thomas didn't die 15 years ago. He was here, all along, living as William Harper. The pieces clicked into place. The separate bedrooms in the house, the mysteriously empty space at the dinner table during my summer visits. He was hiding whenever I came. Linda moved to sit beside him. It broke his heart, not being able to know his grandson properly. He would watch from the window when Margaret taught you to ride, or when you helped with the garden. Why maintain the lie, even with family? Why keep me in the dark? Because children talk, Linda said simply. One innocent comment at school about your unusual grandfather could have unraveled everything. It was safer this way. For whom? For all of us. Linda gestured to the room around them. What's in this chamber isn't just art, Samuel. It's evidence of crimes, spanning decades. Thomas was still wanted in 6 countries when he died. Margaret could have been charged as an accessory. And she hesitated. I was directly involved in several recoveries. Samuel closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of this revelation. So my grandfather wasn't a small-town rancher who died before I could remember him. He was an internationally wanted art thief who hid from me my entire life. He opened his eyes, fixing his mother with an accusatory stare. What else haven't you told me? Linda and Elaine exchanged a look that sent a chill through Samuel. Thomas wasn't just stealing back Nazi-looted art, Linda said carefully. That's what the operation became, but it didn't start that way. Michael's voice cut in from across the room. Sheriff's team is heading toward the barn. 2 minutes, maybe less. Samuel kept his focus on his mother. Tell me. Linda drew a deep breath. Thomas was born in Berlin. His family was Jewish, wealthy collectors, who lost everything, their art, their property, their lives, except Thomas, who was hidden with Christian neighbors. After the war, he was raised in various orphanages, before eventually discovering his true identity. So this was personal for him, Samuel said, reclaiming what was stolen from his family. Yes, but complicated. His early recoveries were reckless, driven by anger. He took back anything he could identify as Jewish-owned, without concern for current ownership or documentation. Elaine interjected. The turning point came when he met her grandmother in Paris, 1966. She was studying art history, working at the Louvre. She helped him channel his mission into something more precise, more just. And they fell in love, Samuel concluded. Linda nodded. I was born the next year. By then, they had developed the system: meticulous research, targeted recovery, verified heirs, anonymous returns. Above them, the barn door creaked open. Footsteps crossed the floor. "They're in," Michael whispered. Samuel stared at the birth certificate in his hands, then at his mother. Pieces were still missing. "If all this is true, why did you really leave? It wasn't just about that injured guard, was it?" Linda's expression changed, hardening slightly. "I left because I discovered something about Thomas, about his past, that Margaret didn't want me to know." "What?" Before she could answer, Michael raised his hand for silence. The trapdoor that had escaped discovery during previous casual inspections was now under direct scrutiny. They could hear the sheriff's voice directly above them. "This floor doesn't match the rest. Newer boards here, and this ring." Samuel looked at the monitoring screen. Sheriff Collins was kneeling precisely above their heads, fingers tracing the outline of the trapdoor. Linda moved swiftly to a filing cabinet, removing a slim folder. "Whatever happens next," she whispered urgently, "you need to know the full truth." She pressed the folder into Samuel's hands. "About Thomas, about the collection, and about who's really behind the search warrant." The trapdoor handle moved slightly, tested from above. "They've found us," Michael breathed. The weathered map unfolded across the motel room bed, its creases deep from years of careful storage. Samuel traced the marked locations with his finger, dots and stars scattered across Europe and North America, connected by faint lines drawn in different colors. Each marking was labeled with a date and cryptic initials. "He documented everything," Linda said, watching her son examine the map. "Thomas was meticulous about tracking the collection's pieces, where they were found, where they were stored, which families they belonged to." The cheap motel room on the outskirts of town had become their temporary headquarters after the narrow escape from the ranch. They'd exited through an emergency tunnel, another of Thomas's paranoid precautions that had proven prescient moments before the sheriff breached the trapdoor. "How did you know the tunnel existed?" Samuel had asked his mother as they'd emerged into the woods a quarter-mile from the property line, where Elaine had been waiting with a vehicle. "Because I helped dig it," Linda had replied simply. Now, hours later, Michael entered the room with coffee and sandwiches from a nearby diner. "Sheriff's put out a request to locate us for questioning. Not quite a warrant, but it's escalating." "Did they find anything in the room?" Elaine asked from her position by the window. "Not the important things. We got those out in time." Michael nodded toward the duffel bags containing the most crucial documents and several small artifacts. "But they know what the space was used for. Too much evidence to ignore." Samuel looked up from the mat. "We need to understand who's really behind this." The sheriff seemed to know exactly where to look. He turned to his mother. "You said someone approached you about the Vermeer study. Who?" Linda sank into the room's single armchair. "A man named Victor Keller presented himself as a representative of the family of Heinrich Gruber, the guard injured in Vienna. Said they'd tracked me down through old connections and wanted closure." "And you believed him?" "Not entirely, but he knew details that only someone connected to the case could know." She leaned forward. "I played along, tried to learn his real agenda. That's when I discovered he works for Catherine Blackwell, the woman from Westridge Development." Samuel's brow furrowed. "What does a real estate company want with stolen art?" Linda opened the folder she'd given Samuel during their escape. Inside was a document that appeared to be a corporate structure chart. "Westridge is just one arm of Blackwell Industries. The real power is 3 levels up. Sebastian Blackwell, Catherine's father." Michael moved closer, examining the document. "Blackwell, why is that name familiar?" "Because before the war they were the Schwarzwalds," Linda explained. "A German industrialist family who collaborated with the Nazi regime. They acquired substantial assets from Jewish businesses and individuals during the Third Reich, including a significant art collection." Samuel's breath caught. "Our collection?" "Some of it," Linda confirmed. "When Sebastian's father emigrated to America after the war, he changed the family name and built a new fortune, burying the source of his initial capital. Sebastian has spent decades ensuring that history remains buried." Elaine, who had been quietly monitoring the parking lot, joined them at the table. "So Catherine's interest in the ranch was never about the land, Samuel concluded. It was about eliminating evidence that could connect her family to Nazi collaboration and stolen property. Exactly. Linda tapped the map, and these stars mark the locations of other caches, safe houses, Thomas established around the world, containing documentation, provenance records, and some additional pieces. Insurance against exactly this scenario. Samuel studied his mother with new understanding. You didn't come back just to warn Grandma. You came back because you knew this confrontation was inevitable. Linda met his gaze steadily. I came back to finish what my father started, what your grandmother continued after his death, which is justice, Linda said simply. The Blackwells represent dozens of families who built post-war fortunes on theft and human suffering, then reinvented themselves as respectable business leaders. Thomas devoted his life to ensuring they couldn't outrun their history. Samuel absorbed this, then asked the question that had been bothering him since their escape. You said there was something about Thomas that made you leave. Something Grandma didn't want you to know. Linda's expression tightened. When I was 18, I discovered documents suggesting Thomas wasn't just recovering art from former Nazis. He was systematically exposing them, sometimes with devastating consequences to their families and reputations. Isn't that justice? Not when it extends to children and grandchildren who had nothing to do with the crimes. Linda's voice hardened. Thomas believed in generational guilt. I couldn't accept that. Neither can you if you're to complete his mission, without becoming what he sometimes was, an avenger rather than a restorer. The conversation paused as a vehicle pulled into the motel parking lot. Through the gap in the curtains, they watched as a police cruiser slowly circled the area. We can't stay here, Michael said quietly. They'll canvass the local motel soon enough. Samuel gathered the map and documents, mind racing. We need to get to one of these safe houses, the closest one. Minneapolis, Linda said without hesitation. I can access it. It contains evidence specifically linking the Blackwells to looted artwork, enough to neutralize their influence. As they packed their meager belongings, Samuel noticed his mother slip a small photograph into her pocket, the same one of Thomas on the ranch porch. Behind the superficial story of his family, a far more complex truth had been hiding all along. His grandfather hadn't been a simple rancher, nor a mere art thief. He'd been a man on a lifelong mission of accountability that had now passed to his grandson. Be careful, Sammy, Linda had written on the back of that photo years ago. Some doors once opened can never be closed again. Samuel understood those words now as never before. The old revolver felt heavier than its actual weight as Samuel turned it over in his hand. According to his mother, it had belonged to Thomas, a relic from his early days when art recovery had occasionally required more than just lock-picking skills. The blued steel was well maintained, despite its age, suggesting his grandmother had continued to care for it long after Thomas was gone. I'm not comfortable with this, Samuel said, carefully placing the gun on the table of the Minneapolis apartment they'd secured under false names. None of us are, Linda replied. But the Blackwells don't play by gentlemen's rules. They never have. 3 days had passed since their escape from the ranch. The small 2-bedroom apartment belonged to a former colleague of Thomas's, now in his 80s, and living in a retirement community, but still loyal to the cause. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing art history volumes, and the spare bedroom had been converted into a secure storage area with a sophisticated alarm system. Elaine spread a building schematic across the kitchen table. Blackwell Industries occupies the top 8 floors of their downtown headquarters. Sebastian's office is on the 42nd floor, corner suite. According to our intel, that's where he keeps his private safe, and we believe the evidence we need is inside, Samuel asked. Michael nodded. Financial records establishing the Schwarzwald fortune's origins, including receipts for art purchased from Nazi officials. Thomas documented their existence before Sebastian's father died, but could never access them. Linda traced a path on the schematic. Security is extensive, but primarily designed to keep people out, not in. If we can get someone inside legitimately, the exit plan becomes simpler, sir. Samuel studied the building layout, and that someone would be me. You're the only one they haven't identified, Elaine confirmed. Catherine Blackwell has met you, but only briefly, and you weren't on the property when the sheriff executed the search warrant. The plan they developed was audacious but plausible. Samuel would pose as an architectural consultant, using his actual professional background for authenticity. With forged credentials prepared by one of Thomas's old contacts, he would gain access to the executive floors on the pretext of a building assessment. Once you're inside, Linda continued, you'll need approximately 12 minutes to reach Sebastian's office, access the safe, and secure the documents. Assuming his office is empty, Samuel noted, we'll ensure it is. Michael tapped a notation on their planning document. Sebastian has a standing lunch meeting every Thursday. His executive assistant takes a break at precisely 1:15. That gives you a window. It was a plan built on decades of experience in similar operations, refined by 3 generations of the same family. As they worked through the details, Samuel marveled at how naturally his mother had returned to this world, her knowledge of security systems, her attention to timing and contingencies, her calm assessment of risks. You never really left this life behind, did you? They asked her during a quiet moment as the others took a break. Linda's expression softened. I left the operations, the danger, but the mission? No. I found other ways to contribute. Why do you think I became an art history teacher? Every semester, I dedicated time to teaching my students about the Nazi looting of cultural treasures, about the families who lost everything. Did it help? With the guilt, I mean. Some. She looked away briefly, but I always knew this moment would come, that eventually, the past would demand a reckoning. As evening approached, they gathered for a final review. The operation was scheduled for tomorrow. Their roles were clear, their contingencies established. If successful, they would secure evidence that could force the Blackwells to back off and potentially facilitate the return of remaining artworks to their rightful owners. Get some rest, Elaine advised as they concluded. Tomorrow we'll test all of us. Later, unable to sleep, Samuel stood at the apartment window overlooking the city. Minneapolis glittered beneath a clear night sky, the Blackwell building visible in the distance, illuminated against the darkness like a beacon or a target. His phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. I know what you're planning. Be careful. Not everyone on your team has the same agenda. Catherine Blackwell. Or someone else entirely. Samuel deleted the message. Unsettled, in the spare room, he could hear his mother's voice as she made a call she thought was private. He moved closer to the door, listening. Yes, we're proceeding tomorrow. No, he doesn't suspect. Trust me, by this time tomorrow, it will all be over. Samuel stepped back silently, mind racing. The warning suddenly seemed more credible. Was his mother playing a deeper game? Had her return been part of a plan orchestrated with someone else? The revolver still lay on the table where he'd left it. Samuel picked it up again, checking that it was loaded as Linda had shown him. Then he tucked it carefully into his jacket pocket. Tomorrow would indeed test them all, perhaps in ways none of them had anticipated. The rain that had threatened all day finally began to fall, pattering against the windows like impatient fingers. In the distance, lightning briefly illuminated the Blackwell Tower, 42 stories of steel and glass protecting secrets buried for generations. Samuel made his decision. Whatever his mother's true agenda, whatever lay in that safe, he would see this through. Not just for his grandmother, or for the abstract concept of justice, but for himself to know, finally, the full truth of who he was and where he came from. Some legacies couldn't be escaped, but they could be faced on one's own terms. The security badge clipped to Samuel's lapel granted him access through the gleaming lobby of Blackwell Tower. Every surface reflected wealth and power: marble floors, brass fixtures, abstract sculptures valued in the millions. Even the air felt expensive, climate-controlled to perfection. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," the receptionist greeted him, using the alias on his forged credentials. "Facilities is expecting you." 41st floor. Samuel nodded professionally, adjusting the architectural portfolio under his arm. Inside, alongside legitimate building plans, were specialized tools for accessing the safe. His earpiece, disguised as a hearing aid, crackled softly. "Lobby clear," came Michael's voice. "Proceed to elevator bank C." Less surveillance. As Samuel crossed the atrium, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished stone, a stranger in a tailored suit, playing a dangerous game started decades before his birth. Thomas's revolver was securely hidden in a modified compartment of his portfolio, its weight a constant reminder of the stakes. The elevator ascended smoothly, each floor representing another barrier between the world and the secrets held at the top. Samuel's thoughts returned to his mother's mysterious phone call, to the warning text. Trust had become a luxury he couldn't afford. Approaching executive floors, he murmured into his concealed microphone. "Any changes?" "Negative," Elaine responded from her position in a cafe across the street. "Sebastian left for lunch 10 minutes ago. Executive floor shows minimal activity." The elevator doors opened to the 41st floor, where a security guard checked his credentials before directing him to the facilities manager. This was the most vulnerable point in their plan, direct human interaction that couldn't be fully scripted. "Mr. Reynolds, welcome." A middle-aged woman extended her hand. "I understand you're assessing our HVAC integration for the renovation proposal." "Yes," Samuel replied, falling into the comfortable rhythm of his actual profession, particularly the executive level. "Modern climate systems require careful planning when working with historical architectural elements." She nodded, accepting the explanation without question. "I can give you 30 minutes up there. Most offices are empty for lunch, which should make your assessment easier." The final security checkpoint was a biometric scanner requiring the facilities manager's fingerprint. Samuel held his breath as they ascended to the 42nd floor. In his ear, the team maintained a running commentary of Sebastian Blackwell's movements, still at lunch, unaware of the intrusion into his domain. "Here we are," the manager said as they reached the executive floor. "I'll be back in 30 minutes to escort you down." Alone at last, Samuel moved efficiently toward the corner office. The absence of cameras in this section, a concession to Sebastian's paranoia about corporate espionage, now worked in their favor. "Approaching target," he whispered. "Status update." A burst of static, then Linda's voice. "Clear for entry." Executive assistant just left for lunch. Samuel used a specialized electronic device to bypass the office door lock. Another skill inherited from his family's unusual legacy. Sebastian Blackwell's office revealed itself, a monument to power and privilege. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, priceless artwork adorned the walls, and a massive desk dominated the center of the room. But what caught Samuel's attention was a small painting hanging behind the desk, a landscape that matched the photograph from his grandmother's safety deposit box. Not a random piece of the collection, but one specifically chosen for display in this inner sanctum. "I've found one of the paintings," Samuel reported, moving toward the concealed safe they believed was hidden behind a bookshelf. "Focus on the documents," Linda reminded him. "The painting is secondary." Samuel carefully moved books aside, revealing the expected safe, a high-end model, but one Thomas had documented methods for accessing. He removed the specialized tools from his portfolio and began the delicate work of defeating the lock. 6 minutes remaining in your window," Michael warned through the earpiece. The safe yielded with a soft click. Inside lay several folders, a velvet jewelry case, and a small metal box exactly as their intelligence had indicated. Samuel quickly photographed the contents before removing the folders, labeled Schwarzwald Legacy. As he leafed through the documents, confirmation of their suspicions emerged in black and white. Financial records showing art purchases from Nazi officials at a fraction of their value. Transfer papers with the names of Jewish families who had been sent to concentration camps. Correspondence establishing the family's complicity. "I've got it," Samuel whispered, securing the documents in his portfolio. The earpiece crackled again, but this time with unexpected urgency. "Abort," came Elaine's voice. "Sebastian is returning early." Security is moving to the executive elevator. Samuel's pulse quickened as he carefully closed the safe and replaced the books. The landscape painting drew his attention again, a direct connection to his grandmother, to the mission that had defined 3 generations of his family. On impulse, he removed it from the wall. If they were forcing a confrontation with the Blackwells, this would be powerful leverage, proof they could expose not just the historical crimes, but the current possession of stolen property. He had just secured the painting in his portfolio when the office door opened unexpectedly. Instead of a security team, Catherine Blackwell stood in the doorway, her expression unsurprised. "Mr. Harper," she said calmly, "I believe you have something that belongs to my family." Thomas Reinhardt's journal lay open on the table between them. Catherine had insisted they move to a private conference room rather than call security immediately, a curious choice that put Samuel on high alert. His portfolio containing the documents and paintings sat beside him, within reach but untouched since their confrontation. "You should read it," Catherine said, gesturing to the journal, "particularly the entries from 1987. "Where did you get this?" Samuel asked, not touching the book. "This belonged to my grandfather. Your mother provided it." Catherine's expression remained neutral, professional. "She thought it might help you understand the fuller context of your family's activities." The earpiece had gone silent. Samuel's attempts to subtly check in with the team had yielded nothing but static. He was on his own, facing a woman whose family legacy was as complicated as his own. "My mother gave you this when?" "This morning, before you arrived." Catherine sat across from him, hands folded on the polished table. "She believed you deserved to know the complete truth before making irreversible decisions." Samuel's mind raced back to the mysterious phone call he'd overheard, the warning text. "Where is she now?" "Waiting. Safe." Catherine nodded toward the journal. "Please, read it." With cautious movements, Samuel pulled the journal close. The handwriting matched the notes he'd seen in the underground room, his grandfather's distinctive script, slightly slanted to the right. The entries from 1987 detailed Thomas's growing obsession with exposing former Nazi collaborators, not just recovering stolen art. One passage stood out. "Confronted Schwarzwald today. Offered him a choice, public confession and restitution, or exposure. He laughed. Said no one would believe a common thief over a respected businessman. He's wrong. I have the evidence. His family will pay for their crimes, no matter how many generations it takes." Samuel looked up, finding Catherine watching him intently. "He was targeting your family specifically." "My grandfather specifically," she corrected. "And yes, with good reason. The Schwarzwalds, later the Blackwells, were complicit in terrible things. I don't deny our family history." This was not the response Samuel had expected. "Then what is this about? Why not call security the moment you saw me in your father's office?" Catherine reached for a thin folder beside her and slid it across the table. "Because Thomas Reinhardt wasn't the only one with a mission that spanned generations. Open it." The folder contained newspaper clippings, photographs and letters, all documenting Catherine's grandfather's efforts after emigrating to America. Philanthropic donations to Jewish causes, financial support for Holocaust survivors, establishment of art restitution funds. "He tried to make amends," Catherine said quietly. "Not publicly, cowardly perhaps, but genuinely. The guilt consumed him until his death." Samuel frowned. "If that's true, why keep stolen artwork? Why maintain the deception about your family's past?" "My father's choice, not mine." Catherine's composure slipped slightly, revealing genuine emotion. "Sebastian believes in protecting the family legacy at all costs. I believe in redemption." The door opened before Samuel could respond. Linda entered, followed by a distinguished older man Samuel didn't recognize. "I see you've had your conversation," Linda said, assessing the scene. "Mum?" Samuel stood. "What's going on? Who is this?" "Jacob Weiss," the older man said with a slight accent. "I represent several families seeking restitution for assets seized during the Holocaust. I've been working with your mother, and more recently with Miss Blackwell, to resolve these claims outside the public eye. Samuel felt as though the ground was shifting beneath him. You've been working together. For how long? 6 months, Linda admitted. After I was contacted about the Vermeer study, I reached out to Catherine directly. I suspected she might not share her father's views on maintaining family secrets. I've been trying to change things from the inside, Catherine explained, but my father's position has been immovable, until now. She nodded toward Samuel's portfolio. Those documents you recovered, combined with the complete inventory of the remaining artwork from your grandmother's collection, create a powerful leverage point. A negotiating position, Jacob Weiss clarified. One that could facilitate the return of stolen cultural treasures without lengthy legal battles and without destroying the Blackwell name entirely. Samuel looked between them, understanding dawning. This whole operation might break in. The confrontation, it was staged. Not entirely, Linda said. The danger is real. Sebastian would destroy everything rather than admit his father's crimes. But we needed you to recover those documents legitimate. Catherine couldn't simply hand them over without risking her position. And if I'd been caught by security instead of finding you waiting, contingency plans were in place, Catherine assured him. But we had faith in your abilities. Your grandmother spoke highly of your potential. My grandmother? When did you job? They met once, Linda interjected. Before Margaret died. She was the one who suggested Catherine might be different from her father. The journal on the table suddenly held new significance. Samuel turned to the final pages, finding an entry dated just weeks before his grandmother's death. Perhaps redemption is possible, even for the children of those who committed great wrongs. The Reinhardt legacy and the Schwarzwald legacy might yet find peace through the next generation. Samuel sat back, processing the implications. So what happens now? Now, Jacob Weiss said with quiet determination, we finish what your grandfather started, but with justice, not vengeance, as our guiding principle. Through the conference room window, Samuel could see dark clouds gathering over the city, a storm approaching that mirrored the confrontation to come. Sebastian Blackwell would not surrender his family's secrets without a fight. The bronze plaque gleamed under the museum lights, its inscription simple yet profound. The Reinhardt Blackwell Collection, reclaiming heritage, restoring justice. Samuel stood before it, watching as visitors moved through the small exhibition that occupied what had once been his grandmother's barn. 1 year had passed since the confrontation at Blackwell Tower. The final showdown with Sebastian had been less dramatic than anticipated, but no less consequential. Faced with the evidence his daughter and the Reinhardts had assembled, he'd chosen a negotiated surrender rather than public exposure. The terms had been clear: restitution to surviving families, the establishment of a foundation dedicated to Holocaust education, and the transformation of Willow Creek Ranch into a private museum documenting both the Nazi looting of cultural treasures and the decades-long effort to restore them. Your grandmother would be proud, Elaine said, joining Samuel by the plaque. At 75, she remained sharp as ever, now serving as the museum's chief archivist, though she might find all these visitors disruptive to her quiet ranch life. Samuel smiled. I think she'd appreciate that her life's work is being honored. He gestured toward a group of high school students listening attentively to their guide, Linda Harper, who had returned to teaching, but now split her time between the classroom and the museum. Did you ever imagine it would end this way? Elaine asked. The Reinhardts and the Blackwells, working together after all this time. Samuel's gaze drifted to Catherine Blackwell, who stood across the room deep in conversation with Jacob Weiss. Her father had resigned from Blackwell Industries, retreating to private life, while Catherine restructured the company with transparency about its origins. The transition hadn't been painless, but the family had survived with its core assets intact. A more merciful outcome than Thomas Reinhardt might have envisioned. I think this is exactly what my grandmother hoped for, Samuel replied. Not vengeance, but reconciliation, a chance for both families to move beyond their painful histories. The centerpiece of the exhibition was the underground room itself, preserved exactly as Margaret had maintained it, with its radio equipment, maps and documents. Visitors descended the same stairs Samuel had first traveled that stormy night, experiencing the revelation just as he had. Most of the collection had been returned to the families of original owners, a process Jacob Weiss continued to oversee with meticulous care. Only a few pieces remained unclaimed, including the small landscape that had started Samuel's journey, the first piece Thomas and Margaret had recovered together. "Have you decided what you'll do now?" Elaine asked as they moved through the exhibition. "The foundation can run without daily involvement from you." Samuel nodded. "I'm going back to architecture, but with a new focus. There's a growing field in cultural heritage preservation, designing spaces that honor history while serving contemporary needs." He paused before the photograph of Thomas and Margaret in Geneva. "I think I've found my own way to continue the family legacy." Later that evening, after the visitors had departed, Samuel sat alone on the porch of the ranch house, now his permanent home. The sunset painted the horizon in shades of amber and gold, illuminating the landscape his grandmother had loved so dearly. Linda joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Their relationship had strengthened through the trials they'd faced together, the secrets now replaced with honest communication. "I keep expecting to see her walking up from the garden," Linda said softly, settling into the chair beside her son. "Some days it feels like she's still here, watching over all of this." "I think she is in a way." Samuel accepted the coffee gratefully. "Through what she built, what she protected, through us." They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened across the ranch. In the distance, the barn, now museum, stood illuminated against the gathering darkness, a beacon of memory and truth. "Do you ever wonder what might have been?" Linda asked, eventually. "If Thomas had chosen a different path? If they had lived normal lives?" Samuel considered the question, thinking of the complex legacies that had shaped him: art thief and justice seeker, deception and integrity, secrets and revelations. "I think they lived exactly the lives they were meant to live," he answered finally. "Just as we're living ours." Inside the house, among Margaret's belongings Samuel had preserved, the wooden box that had once been locked now sat open on the mantelpiece. Inside, visible to anyone who cared to look, rested a collection of small mementos: the key from the hollow tree, the photograph of Thomas and Margaret in Geneva, and a handwritten note Samuel had discovered in the final pages of his grandfather's journal. "The past cannot be changed, only acknowledged. The future cannot be controlled, only shaped by our choices today. In the end, all that matters is that we tried to leave this world more just than we found it." As night fell completely over Willow Creek Ranch, the stars emerged in brilliant clarity, the same stars that had guided 3 generations of his family through their extraordinary journey of justice, reconciliation, and ultimately peace.